So this is the KhoodeelaarTV Television Channel, Part A. We didn't broadcast an edition on Tuesday, the 1st of June 2021, due to logistical issues and issues to do with ongoing legal activities by the campaign. And so therefore this is the first edition part A of Wednesday, the 2nd of June 2021. So we shall be taking a look at the latest contradictions and misinformation, false propaganda, and lies perpetrated by Fleet Street papers, including by the what on the evidence of its contents we call financial crimes, which is supposed to be the pink paper that has been misdescribed for decades as a publication that is not as dishonestly edited and promoted and published as the rest of Fleet Street, but it is as dishonestly promoted and published and propagated and kind of boasted about as the rest of Fleet Street. And the rest of Fleet Street, in numerical terms, in terms of the numbers of people who purchase or buy access to the outlets, dominated by the Times, which is paywalled, that is to say you have to pay a subscription in order to get access. And the Scum is not paywalled, but neither of the titles is available in terms of digital image without paying, without payments by the intended or intending viewer. So we've got this Indian origin ultra right-wing liar called Janan Ganesh. Now Janan Ganesh will definitely feature as one of the links or one of the once given platforms on the Braille pad fronted ghastly broadcast, or GB, that is about to go live very soon in the next few days or weeks. And Braille pad Andrew Neil has hit the headlines earlier this week with the claim that his ghastly broadcast is going to be made broadcast from France. Now, Braille pad and his ghastly broadcast colleagues, almost every single one of them has been anti-European, and they have brazenly promoted Brexit. And for Braille pad to start broadcasting ghastly broadcast from France, which is very much part of the EU, is worse than ironic. It is evidence of the corruption of the Brexiteers. So when we say that the Flea Street papers today are lying, we include that kind of content and narrative and agenda and contradictions. Now, there is a piece, there is a letter in the Financial Times from somebody in Madhya Pradesh, in India. And the heading to that letter is India's slowing cases may hide rural infection rates. Well, it's not just the rural infection rates, it's the infection rates in the cities, and also the increasingly limited supply of whatever medicine and medical kind of stock there may be. It's reported by the Modi peddling English language press, including the Times of India, the Hindustan Times, and the Hindu. These titles are all daily titles, but they're all absolutely corrupt as Modi is. Now, here is a absolutely unbelievably dishonest item on page 2, moving back to Britain from India. This is the one that would not be believable looking at the headings in the Fleet Street papers over the weekend and the last 2 days of this week. That Boris Johnson and his now married wife, third wife, had 2-day break after wedding. Looking at the pictures dominating the pages of the Fleet Street Liars, it would be impossible to think that they had any break at all. So they keep springing these kind of lies on the general kind of viewers and readers. So there is this contradiction again, because in the last 3 days, the contradictory items have been that because of the virus persisting, Johnson has been told not to lift the restrictions on the 21st of June. And even one minister in the headings has been reportedly warning Johnson not to lift the restrictions on the 21st. And yet here is the contradictory 2 pages heading on the Times. We are on track for big reopening, says minister despite rising cases. So that's a contradiction admitted in the heading. And the Times on the front page has got almost truthful item headed, Johnson accused of failing pupils with cheap schools boost. That's Johnson accused. Now, this is the title, the Times newspaper that published that interview with the recently retired French ambassador to the UK. And the heading or headline to that interview, as published by the Times, reads and read, Boris Johnson is a congenital liar. And here is the I mean, this is a pattern. This is a pattern that every state that has been in the news about this. And it says Russia accused of undercounting deaths. Now, every state has been undercounting deaths. And the Times has got almost a tearful headline or tearful heading. The Times is rhetorically sobbing as it has to publish this. Ashcroft's son's partner taken to jail, and here is the sobbing, plagued by scorpions. Now, we said in the last kind of 48 hours, let's say, that this killer of the black policeman in Belize would get off. And we shall come to that a bit more in detail later. And this right-winger, James Carcap, is given a platform to comment. It's a propaganda for Johnson. So Johnson's plans can transform Britain for good. I mean, can you believe this? And here is the Peter Brooks contrasting characters about media attention. One is the Osaka, the tennis player Osaka, who pulled out of the French game this week because she didn't want to attend or address a news conference. So it says about her, I mean, Peter Brooks, I'm desperate, no media attention. And the one next to it is a pocket-sized counterpart. I'm desperate, any media attention, that is Keir Starmer, begging, prostrating to a Pierce moron who is sitting in a chair. And Keir Starmer is shown in a begging position on the floor. It's a rare item about the Rohingyas that have rioted over conditions on flood-prone refugee island off the coast of Bangladesh. This is the piece by Richard Perry, Asia editor. Thousands of Rohingya refugees rioted against guards yesterday as they demanded to be allowed to leave a remote and flood-prone island off Bangladesh amid reports of beatings and abuse by the authorities. Bricks and stones were thrown at the police and windows were broken as some 4,000 people protested against conditions on Bashanchor Island in the Bay of Bengal, which has been converted from sandbanks into refugee center in the face of objections from humanitarian organizations. The demonstrations coincided with a visit by officials from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to assess conditions on the island, where 18,000 Rohingyas from Myanmar have been relocated from camps on the mainland of Bangladesh. And the UNHCR said it was deeply concerned at reports of injuries. And we shall talk more about the Rohingyas later. And there is an item about Italy, which is unbelievable but predictable. Headline: Mafia boss who killed 150 people is set free. It can only happen in Italy. Or can it? And this piece on the business section, 34, pages 34 and 35, is again contradicting what the Financial Times said at the weekend, let's say. And the Financial Times is not alone that the revival of the UK economy, so-called, or the predictions of solid revival of the UK economy was wrong. It was not going to happen. And here is a piece on the same section, business, with a picture of Rishi Sunak, the finance minister, carrying a red book. It says record house prices put bank on inflation alert. Now, this is again the perpetual corruption of capitalism and greed. Remember what Johnson said? Johnson said only a few months ago that greed was good. Well, he said greed is good. So let's put it generically in the present tense. And there is a thing about housing, which is full of contradictions, and we shall again look at this contradictory headline. Councils must raise housing game. Now this is the same page of about the Bank of England being alarmed at the prospect of rising house prices leading to inflation. And there are other reports in other parts of the Fleet Street outlets that say that inflation is going to be a permanent fixture. And the main front page item on the Times is that first day of pandemic with no COVID fatalities. Now, this is completely false, and we shall come to that. When we say Fleet Street, we don't kind of necessarily exclude the broadcasting counterparts or the internet counterparts, because on the internet, quite apart from the personal and non-business and non-profit blogs and reports like the Khoodeelaar campaign, which has been significantly present on the internet, despite the fact that Google, the search engine, suppresses that presence because of Google's corrupt policies. We have published online since we began posting on the internet, let's say 17, 18 years ago. We have posted about 5 to 6 million items. 5 to 6 million items of various sizes and lengths. So here is the thing by Henry Zafman. Zafman is a toxic name in Fleet Street. And he is being described in the Times today as their chief political correspondent. Now, that means that Zafman is very much an agent of the corrupt regime fronted by Boris Johnson. The UK reported no new coronavirus deaths yesterday for the first time since the pandemic began, raising hope that the remaining restrictions in England may still be lifted this month. And it is full of John Redwood, Graham Brady, and others, all selected for promotion in this corrupt spin by Henry Zafman and 2 others. Is it 2 others or 3 others? One is Tom Whipple, science editor, Kat Lay, and Eleni Correa. So there are 4 names there, and they have contrived to create a picture on the Times that there is no problem in raising the restrictions, which is an essential part of what Johnson wants to do. And this is the kind of an attitude, negligent, callous attitude, that Narendra Modi has shown by unleashing what has been called by an American weekly this week as the COVID-19 apocalypse in India. And there is a letter in the Metro today, the morning kind of print outlet that is controlled by the Daily Mail. This letter is from a woman called, a woman from Bangalore, who is saying that the Indian crisis is very grave indeed. Most of our family have been affected and are ill with the virus. So she's clearly urging caution for the British authorities and saying that they should not rush to lift the restrictions. And here is a piece in the Scum. The reality stars have been wrapped over dodgy Instagram posts targeting debt-stricken youngsters. Gordy Shore's Chloe Ferry, 25, Helen Briggs, also 25 from X on the beach, and Towie's Miles Barnett, 27 left, were paid to post ads to millions of followers, offering to cut debt by up to 85%. This is the item. So this is the item, but there is no sanction against them. There is no. And the Scum is contradicting what the Times has said. The Times is saying Johnson accused of failing pupils with cheap schools boost, and the Scum is publishing the exact opposite, praising Johnson's stooge, Gavin Williamson. So you can see in the same stable, as it were, the Times and the Scum, they're brazenly contradicting on such a major issue as the provisions for schools that affects millions of children. And the main front page of the Daily Mail is absolutely typically corrupt, and we cannot even begin to mention the extent of the brazen corruption and criminality exhibited by Beaverbrook and his suppress. Now, the Daily Mail on pages 6 and 7, this is a two-page spread, headed COVID's 0 hour. This is a brazenly misleading and brainwashing claim. It's a political propaganda for Johnson again, because underneath that is this: 15 reasons why cure is worse than the disease. So, I mean, we don't have to say that. They're saying it. They are contradicting, they're lying, and they're falsifying, and they're doing dirty, absolutely shameless, corrupt, negligent, irresponsible, deadly boasting. And the Daily Mail does the same thing as the scum, that is contradicting what the Times reports about Johnson failing to tell the truth about schools. And the Mail is running a boast. And the Mail is full of rubbish, lies and corruption and criminality. So there is an admission in the Mail, Ephraim Hardcastle column, that Jan Pisov and Paul Martin are each paid £20,000 per episode of the Have I Got News for You, which we discussed on Monday. Well, updated. And a woman employed as a carer to a man whom she starved to death to steal from his 3.5 million fortune, became the first person in 100 years to be jailed for the offense yesterday. Starving somebody to death. That is the offense. And there is a piece, promotion piece, on almost every paper, plugging Keir Starmer and doing the promotion for the Pierce Moron. And there is a 2-page spread on the cruelty to animals that is going on and is rising in this country. We shall be going back to the promotion for Kerry Simmons. And the spewing plug for Boris Johnson by this fake historian Andrew Roberts is dominated by the picture of Kerry Simmons with 3 images. One is called Glamorous at the top with the sleazeball Cameron with Samantha. Misunderstood is the one in the second one, featuring Tony Blair and Sherry Booth. And Churchill's wife, called his best critic. And Lloyd George, his wife, stood by his lies. And the scum is talking about the Boris Johnson political propaganda for lifting the restrictions. And it's headed Mother of Gods. The woke bandwagon rolls on, crushing common sense beneath its wheels. Now, when it starts like that, it is quite clear how insane the lying Murdoch scum is. Woke is the word that the liars are using increasingly to demonize and denounce and damn anyone who has got rational, scientific, socially conscious awareness and caring, considerate concern for the safety of society of the many. So there is nothing in Fleet Street. There is absolutely nothing in any of the Fleet Street papers about the domination of their agenda, their narrative, their contents by lying, immorality. And as we have been saying the last few weeks, the I newspaper, which has become increasingly an imitation of the right-wing Boris Johnson fronted cabal and an imitation of the Daily Mail. And its heading, the front page heading, is the latest proof that it is. Hopes rise for 21st of June after 0 UK deaths. Now, this claim about 0 UK deaths is as unreliable as any claim about any stability in dealing with the infection and the pandemic in Britain. And I shall come to that in a second. Now, here is the front page heading says one thing, but the contents underneath, the subheadings, let's say something completely different. And it says Hancock, which is the Hancock, the so-called health secretary, urges caution and calls on public to keep the reading that again. Hancock urges caution and calls on public to keep following the rules. Now, if he urges caution and if he keeps people to keep following the rules, then what is the significance of saying that restriction should end? Surely he knows, even Matt Hancock knows that it is irresponsible to lift the restrictions. Now, we read about the Rohingyas on the Bashan Chor island of Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal, rioting yesterday, about 4,000 of them, which coincided with the visit of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And the United Nations High Commission for Refugees has issued a statement, which is a rare one, about the Rohingyas, saying that it is concerned about the number of Rohingyas reportedly injured. And that is rare because since the 2017 genocide of the Rohingya Muslims by the Burmese, the United Nations has been dragging its feet. And because of the geographical proximity, only for the geographical proximity of Cox's Bazar to Burma, have the largest numbers of Rohingya refugees been allowed a kind of camp presence in Cox's Bazar. There has been no international updates on the Rohingya state. And as we have been telling the United Nations every time, the United Nations promotes the leader of the genocide regime, Aung San Suu Kyi, in her revived role as the victim of the latest Burmese military junta coup, that the United Nations has been complicit in the project to rehabilitate the leader of the regime that committed the genocide against the Rohingya people. And there has been no mention of the repeatedly delayed and frustrated but overdue trial of Aung San Suu Kyi for her role as the leader of the regime that committed the genocide. So this United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, who visited the Bashanchar Island yesterday or earlier this week, is a rare event concerning the overall and the particular treatment on the one hand of the Rohingyas and of the absence of activities to hold the criminals to account. Now, the presence of the Rohingyas in Cox's Bazar, as I said, was not something that the Bangladesh political parties welcomed, despite the fact that, by definition, hundreds of millions of pounds, dollars, or even billions of pounds and dollars of international aid was made available to the government of Bangladesh, that is fronted by Hasina. Something that would never have happened without the Rohingyas' presence on a humanitarian kind of level in or on the Bangladeshi soil. And accompanying that kind of money, the Hasina-fronted government in Bangladesh has benefited beyond expectations and beyond descriptions from goodwill that her government would never have received without the Rohingyas having to be helped reluctantly, because the Rohingyas have not been welcomed by Bangladesh. Contrary to the claims and suggestions, because the so-called Bangladeshi press that has served the Hasina regime blindly and uncritically for almost 12 years now, has always reflected the reluctance on the part of Bangladesh to help the Rohingyas. It has always been a reluctant and grudging kind of acceptance of the Rohingyas' humanitarian needs and their plight. Although, on the back of the Rohingyas' suffering, Bangladesh political regime has benefited beyond description. No amount of international money was made available to Bangladesh for nearly 50 years in the scale and to the amount that the Rohingyas' plight has allowed Bangladesh to benefit from. And as I said, with the accompanying goodwill that the fact of the Rohingyas' presence on Bangladeshi soil has generated for the Bangladesh regime, whatever the color, whatever the political party. And the Bangladeshi press, so-called, and the Bangladeshi political so-called opposition have failed to respect, uphold, and support and fight for the rights of the Rohingyas. I mean, the most persistent internal political kind of debate, dispute, disagreements in Bangladesh continue to be about political parties, but they're not really substantial. But that is the theme. They're not substantial because the political opposition and political campaigning kind of platforms in Bangladesh are historically and persistently weak, morally weak, and on many of the key international humanitarian issues, they are absolutely ignorant and very much dependent for their veracity, for their credibility. They're dependent on the approval of the colonial kind of masters, including Britain. And as far as the Western media outlets are concerned, the Rohingyas don't feature in the Western media, haven't done that. The only time they have featured was in the immediate aftermath of the genocide being made publicly known, 2017, 2018. So 19, 20, 21, this is 3 years, 4 calendar years since the genocide, that the Rohingyas have been forgotten. In effect, an implication of their role, their contribution to Bangladesh's economy, as I said, indirectly caused, but that is the truth, that they have been responsible for allowing Bangladesh to make pleas for international aid and be given generously significant amounts of money under the banner of helping the refugees. But the refugees on the ground, the Rohingyas on the ground, have not received even half of the help that they have needed. So we shall be talking more about the Rohingyas after fact-checking on the visit this week by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. If I am not mistaken, this is a South American woman called Michelle something. And she's not somebody who has done the necessary work to help the Rohingyas. She's Michelle Bachelot, I think, but I'll check the name in a minute. Well, she's now. How do they pronounce this one? Bachelet, Bachelet, or Bachelet? Michelle Bachelet. She's a former president of Chile, and she became the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on the 1st of September 2018. So that was a year after the genocide of the Rohingyas by the Burmese. Michelle Bachelet is described as being of French, German, Spanish backgrounds. And she's not known. She's not known for any substantial opposition to violations of human rights. And she has not made any case on behalf of the Rohingyas since she became appointed incumbent in that post in September 2018. So she's following what the United Nations current Secretary General, António Guterres, a former Prime Minister of Portugal, the Portugal Prime Minister, has been doing. And Guterres is a dishonest person. Because shortly after the visit by India's Narendra Modi of Rangoon in Burma, congratulating Aung San Suu Kyi after the genocide, António Guterres made a number of public statements promoting and praising Modi. Now, it's not just India. India's main regional rival, China, has been supportive of the genocidist regime in Burma that massacred and genocided Muslims. And India has been daily persecuting Rohingya refugees struggling to settle down in India as refugees. And there is no evidence. There is no evidence anywhere on the international kind of platforms of any, quote, Muslim majority countries, all of whom have accepted various numbers of Rohingyas. Malaysia has accepted number of Rohingyas, as has Indonesia, and as has Bangladesh, of course, and as has Pakistan. There is no mention in any significant way about Iran's role. And it may have to do with the fact that Iran is not a country of Sunni Muslims. Iran is a Shia majority country. So that may be a factor. Whatever the factor, whatever the reason, Muslims or Muslim majority states represented in terms of official presence on the international United Nations platforms, they have been contemptibly silent about the plight of the Rohingyas on every level. Now, that is not unconnected with the fact that these Muslim majority countries, especially in the cases of Pakistan and Bangladesh, themselves have, as I said, internal issues. But those issues are issues dominated by the corrupt politics and corrupt behavior of these parties. So we have surveyed the published and publicly accessible items in the Western media, and I'll explain why I call Western media rather than the rest of the media. Western media, because the direct result, continuing consequence of colonialism, imperialism, is demonstrated every single day, this hour, this minute, by the world domination, literally, of the media, mainstream media business, and franchises by the Western agencies. So the association with the USA one is Associated Press, which is very dominant. And in the international spheres, the other two are the Reuters and the AFP news organizations. And UPI is not as evident and active as it used to be. And the Chinese one is, of course, limited by the fact that the ones that dominate the world are French and English language ones. So numerically, the Chinese one may have domination at home, but internationally, it is not in any way comparably dominant as Reuters, AFP, and the Associated Press are. Okay, that's the difference between them. But despite the difference between the Chinese and the three other outlets, the political agenda and the political narrative of relegating issues to do with the denial, displacement, dislocation of people who are Muslims. That is the criteria that is in effect used to suppress the news of the violations by others of the human rights of hundreds of millions of Muslims. Now, this program, this campaign is not dedicated based on faith, but on fact. So remember that. If the fact is so dominant that it refers to the majority of the cases of violations and denial of rights and displacements, disenfranchisement, deprivation, and the people who are subjected to these violations and lack of rights are Muslim, then the fact of that is what determines our having to comment on and discuss that. Not because they're Muslims, but of course they're Muslims. That is part of the description, factual description of these people. And the cultural denial of Muslims' rights, or the rights of these people because they're Muslims, is in effect replicated, copied, imitated by the Muslim majority states. Make that point. Think about the logic and the evidence. And all the papers today, Fleet Street, are completely empty. They don't recognize the world, as we said. I mean, Fleet Street doesn't recognize the world outside of Little England. I mean, the world doesn't exist outside of Little England. And here is a chilling recognition of the fact that Keir Starmer has politically murdered the Labour Party. They're saying that the Labour Party fears that Johnson is preparing for 2023 election. Of course he is. And the fact that he's doing that is not unconnected with the fact that Starmer has politically murdered the Labour Party. So Johnson is already elected again. Now, there is a new crisis in India about claim by Cairn Energy on India. It's a Scottish company, Scottish in the UK, within quotation marks. A Scottish company with 180 employees seizing the planes of India's national airline might seem an unlikely scenario. But Cairn Energy is seeking authority to do just that in the latest twist to a legal saga that is testing Boris Johnson's willingness to stand up for UK companies while he seeks to strike post-Brexit trade deals. This one, remember, is a trade deal that Boris Johnson is absolutely desperate to make with Narendra Modi's India. Cairn, which has annual revenue below 400 million, but whose investors include the likes of BlackRock and Vanguard, is suing Air India in New York to enforce an award against New Delhi of $1.2 billion plus interest, a total of 1.7 billion. So it's nearly $1.75 billion. The oil and gas company is trying to prove that Air India is an alter ego of India's government and is therefore jointly liable for the debts and the obligations of India itself, a move that could pave the way for United States Marshals to seize the carrier's jets. It has even hired lawyers Denis Ranitsi, who in 2012 helped seize an Argentine naval vessel in Ghana as part of a long battle between US hedge fund Elliott Capital Management and Buenos Aires. Cairn's award was made in December by an international tribunal in the Netherlands. If enforced, it could trigger handsome returns to current shareholders and reinvigorate a business held back for years by a tussle that has forced it to shed assets, lay off staff, and limit investments. But 5 months on, the Narendra Modi's government has shown no sign it plans to pay up. The case is one of several between Western companies and New Delhi. Now that is going into about six paragraphs that is talking the main substance. And the main substance is the case is one of several between Western companies and New Delhi. Vodafone also became embroiled in a wrangle with India's tax authorities, which demanded $3 billion in back payments. 3 billion euros in back payments. It comes at a sensitive time in the UK-India relations. The country this month outlined a 2030 roadmap to strengthen ties in areas such as trade and defense. London hopes to start negotiations on a full-scale, full trade agreement this autumn. The battle is rooted in 2012 law that allowed New Delhi retrospectively to levy taxes on cross-border transactions in which the underlying assets were in India. In 2014, Cairn was forbidden from selling its remaining 10% in former subsidiary Cairn India, as authorities launched a tax investigation. The following year, it was slapped with 1.6 billion tax bill. Cairn raised proceedings under the UK-India bilateral investment treaty to enforce the withdrawal of the tax demand and seek compensation for losses. Now here is the rare acknowledgement of the existence of international treaties that the UK is signed up to. A factor, an area, a kind of set of international constitutional instruments and tools that we have been exclusively referring to almost every single time. That these are the instruments, not necessarily the ones about India and UK, but the international nature of these instruments. The treaties, the declarations, the conventions, the agreements that the UK remains a signatory member, signed up to. These are the ones that actually bring up to date or humanize, liberalize, and give a reality to the otherwise denied, dormant concepts of due process and compliance with the values of international transparency, obligations, morality, compliance, democracy, and diversity, and so on. The lack of these declarations, statements, conventions, agreements, and treaties, if all the treaties, the thousands of treaties that the UK has signed up to over the decades, if these are removed, say for argument's sake that these treaties didn't exist, that the UK didn't sign up to them, then what you have without these treaties, most of these are post 1940s or 1945, post 1945. Not all of them, but the majority of them, the majority of the ones that we are talking about, the ones that have traction. If you remove those ones, for the sake of argument, then what you are left with as British instruments or British law would be chilling, frighteningly illiberal, oppressive, and corrupt and criminal. The kind of situation that, ironically, Boris Johnson-fronted cabal is creating in Britain now. So although we are talking about Cairn energy and its tussle with India, what the Indian government is doing in the international context would be insignificant in terms of the impact on Britain as compared to what Boris Johnson is doing. He's praising, and it has praised in the last 3 months, greed. Now that gives away the game, that it is actually Boris Johnson belongs in the darkness, in the dark ages. And the worst form of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is the opposite of the existence of control, social control, let's say, societal accountability. And the concept of laissez-faire, based on a French phrase, leave it alone. Leave it alone meaning the state or society, as represented in the presence of the state, should leave politics, the economy alone, and economy should be alone, left alone to be exploited by those who believe in greed is good. So there is no society, there is no acknowledgement of the existence of the many, let alone the rights of the many, to have accountability to society for the behavior of the few who make the decision and who grab hold of the most of the assets and resources that belong to the many, belong to society. So Boris Johnson is bringing to a stark, dark kind of mode, a place, this country, that even Blair didn't do it, even Thatcher didn't do it, no other predecessor regime did it. That is what Boris Johnson is doing. And that is part of the evidence that the Labour Party has been politically murdered by Keir Starmer. There is no presence of Starmer anywhere. There is no reference to Starmer. There is no reference to anything the Labour Party is doing, because it is not doing anything. It is dead. It has been politically murdered and destroyed by Keir Starmer. So, what Starmer has done by staging this Starmer has staged this interview appearance with Piers Morgan, and it's devoid of politics. And it's devoid of politics in a completely revealing way, because by coming across or by giving or sharing his tearing and emotional kind of persona, Starmer has actually confessed to the fact that he has got serious issues to resolve, issues about his feelings, his emotions, and so on. But he has left out the main list of items that matter to the lives of the many. And there is no reference to the international interventionist kind of role that these treaties and obligations and the conventions could play. There is no acknowledgement in the Financial Times article. It's a big article. of any role played by Keir Starmer fronted Labour Party in enforcing the values in the behavior, in relation to the behavior of the UK government by complying with those values. So let's go back to this item about Johnson and Modi. Remember, these are the two toxic names in the context of this discussion and in the context of the discussion of both the regime fronted by Modi in India and the one fronted by Johnson in the UK. Explaining, bringing up to date the real costs of Brexit and the propaganda that Boris Johnson is being allowed to make. The propaganda is being made to show Brexit as an achievement, as a plus, as a bonus for Britain, whereas it is a loss. And the fact that it is a loss is accentuated by the nervous, desperate attempt by Boris Johnson to have, at any cost, a deal with India. Because that is the global Britain picture that Boris Johnson painted, and his co-Brexiteering liars painted in the run-up to the Brexit kind of breakaway agreement or disagreement with the EU after the referendum of June 2016. And again, Starmer, who was wrongly appointed to front the Labour Party on the Brexit thing, failed to say what I'm saying, failed to foresee what we have foreseen and I have foreseen and many others have foreseen and have said, but he failed to represent that in the House of Commons, in Parliament. So the desperation on the part of Boris Johnson to have a deal with India at any cost includes the cost of infecting Britain with the India virus. That has been quite adequately covered, the impact of the India variant. Not as much as the connection with that variant being allowed into Britain by a Boris Johnson who wanted to show that Brexit was an achievement. So the COVID failures by Boris Johnson has been a direct result, a direct consequence of Boris Johnson's Brexiteering rhetoric and Brexiteering promises and Brexiteering lies. So whatever Johnson has done to cause the deaths of thousands of people in Britain is not unconnected with Boris Johnson's Brexiteering agenda. And the Brexiteering agenda is not an agenda on its own. A Brexiteering agenda has been an agenda confected by Boris Johnson's absolute determination to get the votes at any cost. So he has been preparing for the 2023 election since long before the Labour Party allegedly woke up to it. So everything Boris Johnson is doing is to get elected, stay elected. And everything the Labour Party has been doing is to help him do that. So the absence of any reference to Brexit in this piece in the Financial Times on page 9, companies and markets, and the main heading is, let's read it again, Cairn Energy on India Airlines tail in legal saga. Remember, that is a company based in Scotland, but which is seeking legal ruling an enforcement on an order that was made against Indian government earlier. So it's seeking the American legal forum to enforce that order against India. And the enforcement is going to be in the form of, this is theory, this has not been ordered yet, but in the form of the Cairn Energy seizing India Airlines craft, fleet of aeroplanes belonging to India Airlines. And the basis of that, which is the claim, which is still to be kind of decided on by the American judicial platform or platforms, is that Air India or Indian Airline is in fact, or in effect, the alter ego of the Indian government. And the main claim by Cairn Energy is against the Indian government. And as the claim has not been kind of complied with by the Indian government, Cairn Energy is now seeking to get the money by seizing the aircraft of India Airlines, by describing that as part of the Indian government itself, alter ego. What is the alter ego meaning in this context, let's say? The alter ego, the immediate definition offered by Wikipedia is a translation. The alter ego is a Latin phrase, and it is translated in short as other, I. Ego is I, and alter is other. Means an alternative self which is believed to be distinct from a person's normal or true original personality. So let's see how it goes. An alter ego, Latin for other I, means an alternative self which is believed to be distinct from a person's normal or true original personality. Finding one's alter ego will require finding one's other self, one with a different personality. The altered states of the ego may themselves be referred to as alterations. A distinct meaning of alter ego is found in the literary analysis used when referring to fictional literature and other narrative forms, describing a key character in a story who is perceived to be intentionally representative of the author's work or creation by oblique similarities in terms of psychology, behavior, speech, or thoughts, often used to convey the author's thoughts. The term is also sometimes, but less frequently, used to designate a hypothetical twin or best friend to a character in a story. Similarly, the term alter ego may be applied to the role or persona taken on by an actor or by other types of performers. This is going back to the Greek period. Cicero coined the term as part of his philosophical construct in 1st century Rome. So it's Italian, isn't it? Not Greek, but it's Italian. But he described it as a second self, a trusted friend. The existence of another self was first fully recognized in the 18th century when Anton Massima and his followers used hypnosis to separate the alter ego. These experiments showed a behavior pattern that was distinct from the personality of the individual when he was in the waking state compared with when he was under hypnosis. Another character had developed in the altered state of consciousness, but in the same body. And it talks about Freud, who throughout his career would appeal to such instances of dual consciousness to support his thesis of the unconscious. He considered that we may most aptly describe them as cases of a splitting of the mental activities into two groups and say that the same consciousness turns to one or the other of these groups alternately. Freud considered the roots of the phenomenon of the alter ego to be in the narcissistic stage of early childhood. Now, narcissistic is very coincidentally topically relevant to India in the context of the Cairn energy claims, because narcissism is what is destroying all the remnants of the credibility of the Hindu fundamentalist regime fronted by Narendra Modi. Because Modi is the worst narcissist to have any position of power in any state position in India's history. And he has been wasting billions of equivalent on narcissistic projects. And he's reportedly, as we mentioned on Monday, kind of desperate to reopen the work going on for the construction of the big project called the Prime Minister's residence in New Delhi. Now, compared to the money that Cairn energy is owed by Indian government, fronted by Modi, the money that Modi has spent already on narcissistic, egotistic projects, he has wasted that money, is much more than all the money that Cairn energy is claiming against India altogether. So let's look at the remaining part of this article in the Financial Times. Cairn Energy, which has identified $70 billion of Indian assets that could be pursued, that is through the alter ego claim, insists it remains open to continuing constructive dialogue with the government of India. That is just a propaganda wing. International arbitration experts suggest that other Indian-owned assets such as shares and bank accounts might be easier targets, and that the maneuver against Air India, which Modi's government is trying to privatize, was designed to have maximum impact. They are trying to get a settlement, said an international arbitration. Is it an expert lawyer who described Cairn's actions as aggressive? Satvik Varma, a New Delhi-based lawyer, said Cairn had few options because Indian courts did not recognize international arbitration awards granted under bilateral investment treaties. Cairn is also answerable to its shareholders, and after it has an award, it has to do everything to seek enforcement, said Varma. A top 15 Cairn shareholder said, "It's a lot of money. At the end of the day, maybe you have to be aggressive." Rashmi Ranjan Das, a joint secretary in the finance ministry in the Indian government, said New Delhi remained in dialogue with Cairn. the government is open to an amicable settlement, but it had to be within the Indian legal framework. The government position is that the tax is a sovereign function. So it's back to the Indian government's taxing foreign companies like Cairn. So Rashmi Ranjan Das noted that Cairn was still participating in legal proceedings over the tax dispute in India. So Cairn is engaged in more than one legal kind of route. Air India was a legally independent entity that had no responsibility to pay amounts under the Cairn arbitral award or any other of India's alleged debts to obligations. Cairn said it had full confidence in its position. Lawyers suggest a logical next step would be for India to apply in New York to stay the Air India proceedings, pending a challenge to the tribunal process in The Hague. So there are 3 international forums, legal forums. The tax battle has taken a heavy toll on Cairn, whose shares were worth more than 8 in 2012 when India's retrospective law was introduced, but now traded about 165p. Although the stock has also been affected by factors such as the oil price crashes of 2014 and 2020. Aside from cutting staff and selling assets in the early years of the dispute, observers say that uncertainty over the award has limited Cairn's ability to compete for assets. Size is increasingly important for independent oil and gas companies that are out of fashion with equity markets. Everyone knows that the London listed Harbour Energy and NR Green and these larger independent oil and gas companies are going to be the winners because they are going to be big enough for investors to care about, said Nathan Piper, analyst at Investec. Cairn has tried to move business forward since 2015, but they haven't really been able to go for it because of the uncertainty or not, or whether you have got $1 billion. So the Cairn, the company, is described in its own position objectively as being not strong enough to continue to pursue India with the claims, but that may change because if the New York application is successful and is granted in Cairn's favor, it may change the whole scenario, and Indian government may have to be forced to acknowledge obligations that Cairn is owed by Indian government. And moving to another aspect of the comparison between Western countries and so-called poor countries is this latest piece by Martin Wolf, which is headed, "A windfall for poor countries is within reach," and it is printed as part of the economics commentary by Martin Wolf. High-income states can help by reallocating their IMF special drawing rights quotas. Now, what is the IMF special drawing rights quotas? The world is close to agreeing on the creation of up to $650 billion in new special drawing rights within the IMF. The initial allocation of these sums would follow the normal principle in international affairs. To those who have it shall be given. To those who have it shall be given. But it is possible and desirable to reallocate a sizable proportion of the benefits of this free money to global purposes, above all by helping fragile low-income countries restore their pandemic battered prospects. This opportunity must be seized. Well, this is something that is a kind of propaganda for the IMF. And we shall come to the details of it. Now, this is a propaganda for the IMF, and this is based on serious, deep ignorance on the part of the writer, Martin Wolf. It is like it reminds of the shallowness of understanding countries that came across in the attitude and outlook exhibited by the Australian-born Philip Alston, the New York University law academic, who was appointed United Nations envoy, special rapporteur on poverty and the states in the countries he visited. He visited the UK in 2018, and we have discussed extensively how Philip Alston's report about the UK was a complete and utter insult to the intelligence. Why? Because Alston took the word of the institutions and he took the slogans of the so-called kind of critics of the state policies, and he actually borrowed shamelessly and openly and without any willingness to look at the reality on the ground, the interpretation available in The Guardian, for example, and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and similar non-charitable but corrupt organizations in the UK. And he didn't question the lack of due process by the local councils, the lack of accountability, lack of access to remedies through the court system. The lack of access is operated by the corrupt judicial bureaucracies at every level in the UK. So what Martin Wolf is saying is that the windfall, which it is not a windfall, it's a capitalistic trap for exploitation. It's like the majority of the Western aid that is supposedly given to poorer countries gets abused and wasted and becomes used as a trap to further impoverish those countries. Now, the many who are the victims of the UK state's poverty creation policies and agenda don't get any access to having their rights being kind of taken away from them and the robbers of their rights being held to account. There is no remedy. There is no platform. There is no mechanism available in the UK. And despite the fact that Amber Rudd, who just became the Secretary of State for Deprivation, Poverty Creation, DWP, as Philip Alston published his preliminary report of the visit to the UK, she rejected Alston's report, suggesting therefore that Alston had said something objectively radical and independent and truthful and revealing. He had not. So Amber Rudd acquired a pro-conservative, right-wing, and in the context of the many of the victims, racist kind of affiliation with her electoral and political base by condemning Philip Alston and coming across as rejecting a revolutionary statement by Philip Alston. Alston himself was a right-winger, despite the fact that he generously overhyped the references, which were mainly trade unions and Guardian, the TUC and that kind of thing, which is completely, predictably corrupt and untruthful and disconnected from the reality of the experience of most victims of the government's poverty creation agenda and policies. And that collection of agenda and policies include the role for poverty creation played by the court system. The lifting of the ban on evictions is a case in point. The fact that people are going to be increasingly exposed to aggravated lack of home and housing rights is not going to be taken into account by the relaxation. The relaxation on the restrictions on evictions. The relaxation that Patrick Jenrick has just brought into practice this week. The court system, the county courts in actual fact that operate the evictions kind of bureaucracy, they are made up of prejudiced judges, racist judges, and judges that are very reactionary and in denial of the evidence that local councils in this context are the main agents of making people homeless. And let's see what the end of the ban on evictions says. So the stunt staged by so-called protesters this week, yesterday let's say, to mark the ending of the ban on evictions by staging a kind of token eviction of Housing Secretary Patrick Janrick. These are not substantial actions, and these will not have any impact on protecting the victims of evictions from all the consequences and impacts. So what we shall be doing is talking about the details of the impact of the evictions in part B. So we shall put an end to this one, which is just about 2 hours.